Hello and welcome to another edition of the Improviser's Guide to the Cello. Jacob back here with you, and today I'm practicing on the John Coltrane classic Giant Steps. You know, I once heard a great jazz musician say that Giant Steps is pretty mediocre as a musical composition, but probably the best etude there is for getting your chops together on your instrument. And today I've got to get this tune ready for a concert. It's going to be a reunion show with my old string quartet Supernova downtown at Grand Performances. I've got about 2 days till the show, and as you can hear, I'm definitely not ready yet. So I haven't done a lesson in a while, and I thought I would kill two birds with one stone and take you inside of my practice routine to show you the cello-specific tips, tricks, and tactics that I use to break down not only a complicated tune like Giant Steps, but really any tune I'm working on. So let's get started. The first thing that I always do, whether I'm working on something as simple as a shift in my classical repertoire or trying to digest a complicated chart like Giant Steps, is I ask my golden rule question. And that golden rule question is what's hard and what's hard about it? A lot of us don't take the time to do that when we start working, and so if we haven't diagnosed that properly, we can waste a lot of time. Now, in the case of Giant Steps, I think what's really hard is transitioning fluidly and easily between distantly related key centers. So this tune is made up of 3 different key centers. It's E flat, G, and the key of B, all major. And one of the things that's hard about that for a lot of us cellists is the fact that those key centers, or the roots of those, are pretty distant from each other on our cello fingerboard. And because a lot of us are locked into this kind of root-centric thinking, we usually practice all of our scales starting from the roots. In our classical training, we don't do modes very much or full range exercises the way our jazz colleagues do. That can instantly make it really difficult for us to establish a grid of where the notes are. So for today, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how I go about establishing that grid so that I can flow between those keys quickly and easily. It's not just a matter of technique, it's also a matter of getting these sounds in my ear, right? So for today, let's just focus on, let's say, 3rd position. And everything we're going to do today is going to stay within that position. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to use modes to help me make those key centers not so distant. Let me show you what I mean. So Giant Steps has 3 key centers. We've got G, B major, and E flat major. So starting with G, so we've got our G major scale. Now, instead of thinking B major, I'm going to think F sharp mixolydian. Now, why did I choose F sharp mixolydian? Because F sharp is right next to G. So if I'm using that kind of root-centric thinking, this is going to break me out of that. But it's also going to set up my grid for me so I can see where all of the notes are in terms of the smoothest voice leading. That is, as close to each other as possible. So going back to my first key, G major, now F sharp mixolydian. And then finally, for our E flat major, instead of thinking E flat major, just to establish the grid, I'm going to think about G, let's do G Phrygian. So we're back to G. That means the root movement is now G, F sharp, G. Pretty easy to think about, feel, and even to hear that root movement on my instrument. Now don't worry, we will go back to the original keys a little bit later, but we're not really practicing giant steps yet, right? We're doing some prep work, just kind of establishing that grid. Okay, so let's run through that together. So starting on G major. Now to Mixolydian, F sharp. Now to Phrygian. One more time, G major. F sharp, Mixolydian. G Phrygian. Feels pretty good. Now let's try a few patterns to really solidify these shapes in our fingers and in our ear. Let's start with a garden variety broken third pattern, like this. And let's do it with the changes to giant steps. We'll slow this way down. And again, our goal is to get better and better at flowing between these different key centers without freaking out. So here we go, starting on G. F sharp. Phrygian. Repeat that one more time. Now let's try a 3 up, 1 down pattern, like this. Building 3 notes from each consecutive degree of the scale. Same thing, and we'll go nice and slow. Now let's try that a little bit faster. Let's try quarter note equals 200 or so. This is still way beneath giant steps tempo. Now let's try that second pattern. Same speed, same idea. Remember, this will be a little bit faster because that other pattern is triplets. One of the most important ideas I focus on in my practicing is forward motion. I first heard forward motion described by the great jazz pianist Hal Galper, who wrote a great book with the same title. A typical experience we've all had as improvisers is playing through a chord change and then at the next bar line trying to do a quick shift to the next chord or key change. This often results in jumpy lines and a complete lack of fluidity and ease. The truth is that in order to play a coherent melodic line, we need to have set up that resolution point at that downbeat earlier, before the bar line. The idea is that when we're playing a melodic line, after we resolve to a new chord change, all of the following notes need to be pointed towards the next resolution note. Now, this isn't how a lot of music appears if we just look at the written page. When we look at a piece of written music, we see the resolution point, usually at the beginning of a bar, and then the notes that are following. The idea is that the notes after the downbeat are actually pointing to the next resolution point. Or, as Hal Galper says, the first beat of the phrase is actually beat 2 of the previous bar. Learning to listen to music this way will instantly make you a much better musician and will completely transform your lines. As a matter of fact, it'll even help your ideas of phrasing when you're playing classical repertoire. As the great pianist Arthur Schnabel once said, his dream would be to erase all the bar lines in Mozart and Beethoven. And it makes a lot of sense if you think about it. When we eliminate those bar lines and play with more forward motion through the bar lines, we start to hear and create longer lines. There are several exercises that I always use for building this type of listening into my practice. If you do any transcribing of great jazz improvisers going all the way back to the bebop era, you'll hear evidence of this in their playing. Oftentimes, Charlie Parker will resolve 1, 2, 3, or even an entire bar early, creating an extra sense of tension that will later resolve. Now let's start building forward motion into our giant steps routine. And we can start with the 2 patterns we just practiced. So, for example, if we go back to pattern number 1, I'm going to play the exact same patterns in the exact same part of the fingerboard, but I'm going to work on resolving to the next key 1 beat early. So we've been working on changing keys every 8 beats, or 2 bars, and so now I'm going to change on the 8th beat of the previous bar. Let me show you what I mean. Starting in G major again, and working on the same pattern. Check this out. 1, 2, 3, change. 1, 2, 3, change. 1, 2, 3, change. Make sense? Let's try that again together. Same idea. Changing 1 beat early. This also really helps your rhythm. Let's try the same thing, now changing on beat 3. Okay, so we're going to change 2 beats early. Here we go. 1, 2, change. 1, 2, change. 1, 2, change. Again. Let's do it on the first or after beat 1. So we're resolving 3 beats early, like this. Now let's try that same idea with our second pattern. Two beats early. Early. That is insanely good practice. Not only does it help you with your rhythm, as we were talking about, but it really helps to master flowing and changing between these different keys. It's also good work just mastering the technique of opening and closing your hand quickly, going from one shape to another. There's no way to play a tune as fast as Giant Steps without having some vocabulary under your fingers. So let's work a few licks into our grid practice, starting with this one. Now, instead of practicing this lick the traditional way, either moving the shape around or trying to play it in all 12 keys, I want to stay in third position. Remember, we're working on flowing from one grid or one shape to another, staying within the grid and staying in position. So I'm going to practice this lick modally. This is really, really great type of practice for your ears and very, very practical for taking vocabulary that you know and using it in creative ways. So for our Mixolydian mode, F-sharp Mixolydian, I'm going to play that same finger pattern staying on the grid. So it'll sound like this. And then for the Phrygian, same idea, just starting on my fourth finger, playing the same pattern. Let's listen to how that sounds with the background track. Starting in G major again. Now to Mixolydian. Now to Phrygian. One more time. Mixolydian. And Phrygian. Now, let's layer in some forward motion. Sorry, I need to sneeze. Don't you hate it when you kind of need to sneeze, but you're not sneezing? That's really annoying. Because the focus of our practice is smoothly and easily transitioning between one key and another, let's move that lick one bar later so that it goes over the bar line into the next key center. And what we're going to do is we're going to adjust our hand frame to fit that new key mid-lick. Let's try this really slowly so you can see what I'm talking about. So we're going to start one bar for free. Starting in Mixolydian and resolving into Phrygian. Starting in major, resolving to Mixolydian. That is also great practice. Let's try speeding that up really quick. Same thing. I cannot think of a better exercise, not just for working on giant steps, but for getting more proficient at changing from just one hand shape to another, from shape 1 to shape 2 to shape 3. And that is really one of the most critical skills we need, not just as cello improvisers, but really as cellists. Really, really good exercise to practice, even if you weren't working on this tune at all. So now let's try one more lick before we go on. And I want to give you a little bonus tip here. When I'm thinking about what licks or what ideas to practice, there's often an ulterior motive. In other words, I don't just want to learn vocabulary, right? Or we don't want to just learn vocabulary. We want to be thinking about how we're improving as musicians. And in order to do that, we need to focus on what our weaknesses are, right? So something that I like to do all the time is I like to watch recordings of myself improvising and I'll try to identify tendencies in my playing. I actually did an Academy show about this recently, the top 3 tendencies most cellists have that they're not even aware of. And these tendencies can box us in and cause us to be more cliched and less spontaneous in our playing. So one of those tendencies that I talked about in that previous video that I mentioned is that most cellists tend to start and even end phrases a lot of the time on either their first or fourth fingers. And I think that has a lot to do with how we first learned our instrument. Most scale patterns and arpeggio patterns and all of that tend to start on first finger or fourth finger. So we're a lot less comfortable working from our second and third. And that can really be a bummer because obviously starting on second and third finger in a lot of contexts can unlock a lot of different ideas. So for this next lick, I'm going to force myself to start on my second finger. Okay, because I know if I'm running through a tune like Giant Steps, any bad tendency I have is going to really come to the fore. It's going to exploit my weaknesses, right? Whenever you're playing a fast or complicated tune, that's usually what happens. So let's see, I'm going to start on my second finger and just in G major. Let's see here. Okay, I like that. Great. Now let's run that through the gauntlet. And let's go slow again. I'm going to bump it back down to maybe 105 just to get the hang of it. Next key. In Phrygian. Very cool. Another thing we could do is we could put this in the next bar again to work on flowing into the next key. Let's give that a try. So 1 bar for free. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Now. Very cool. I should also mention a little bonus. I didn't notice this, but I was actually throwing in a little chromatic tone in there. Did you see where it was? So in G major, I was actually playing, and that'll happen organically for you. If you spend enough time with this material, as you're hearing it and feeling it more, you'll start throwing in those chromatic tones, those notes that are in the gaps, and that's a great thing, right? We want to be able to exploit all of the possibilities of what's available within our shred shapes. I like to tell students that they mastered a concept when they can sound great using it. So if you can't take just the basic hand shapes we've used so far and ideas and play something that you like, you're not ready to go on. So at least something like this. I hope you notice the economy of motion in my hands, right? That comes from spending a lot of time with just this material, right? And that's our goal, right? We want to be able to play Giant Steps without freaking out and overshifting and really understanding the relationships harmonically and intervallically that exist on our fingerboard. Well, I hope you enjoyed the first half of our Giant Steps exploration. I'm going to grab my first cup of coffee of the day before diving back in to more advanced concepts, including how to use the 2+4+1 method and the slip fingering concept to reach not only the other notes of the scales, but to cover the full chromatic scale. And from there, we're really going to go wild talking about the gapping method, different uses of arpeggios and pentatonic scales, and so much more. If you've come this far and haven't had a chance to check out the videos on the IGC site, a lot of the stuff we're going to be doing in the next lesson is going to be too advanced for you and would probably confuse you completely. So I'm going to make the second video available exclusively on the IGC site, and I hope you get a chance to join us there.